Hey there kids, it's me, Mrcreepypasta, and I just wanted to tell you about one quick thing before we get started on tonight's story featuring Autumn Ivy, and it's about the book The Devil's in the Details by J.D. McGregor. You can actually get his new book available for free in the description down below. If you use that link, you can sign up for his mailing list that'll tell you about his newest book that is going to be coming on March 20th, and get your own copy of The Devil's in the Details by J.D. McGregor, which is pretty cool because that's the author of tonight's story as well. So, without further ado, on to tonight's story.
My bladder was on the brink of explosion. I'd battled the urge to get out of bed for so long, my legs had tremors. I tiptoed toward the window, its outer side stained with frost, and peered up the snow-covered hill. It was marked with weighted dead trees and shrubs all the way up to my parents' house. They didn't leave the nightlight on in the living room. Predictably inconsiderate behavior. Christmas was a big deal in the Martin family. Too big, in my opinion. Every year, even as the children grew up and moved out of the house, we would all return for the Christmas season for a few days, at least. No visiting friends or the families of significant others. It always had to be at the Martin residence. It was non-negotiable. If they truly appreciated their 27-year-old and youngest daughter's company, they wouldn't have given her the shit end of the stick every year and forced her to stay in the cabin Dad built out back when she was a teenager. The little wooden structure definitely looked nice next to the woods at the end of the lot. It did provide extra space in a small house that was way too full every Christmas season. The privacy was appreciated by me and my fiancé, Brett, who was on his first Martin Christmas visit. We'd surprised Mom and Dad with the big rock on my engagement ring. They hugged each other, and my dad subsequently picked up our bags and guided us all the way down the hill towards the cabin. He was sure to point out the new space heater he'd bought to keep us warm overnight. Well, too bad he still hadn't installed any goddamn plumbing. I pulled my boots over my feet and the bottoms of my pajamas. The urge to pee had grown so strong that my stomach radiated shockwaves of pain when I bent over to lace them up. A light snow seemed to start the moment I pushed the creaking door open and stepped outside. I closed it gently behind me, careful to not wake up Brett. Cold gusts of wind blew through the backyard and then died in the trees. Frozen branches clashed together and knocked little bits of ice to the ground. The air was far crisper than when we'd first headed out. I tucked my elbows into my sides and pressed towards the house, wishing I could have brought my jacket with me. Next year, fucking Jerry could sleep in the cabin. He was the biggest burnout from the four of us, and therefore was most deserving of displacement. He was the only one who didn't bring anyone home, and God knows Christine and Tracy wouldn't dream of spending a night out in the cabin, even if our parents dared to suggest it. Something had stirred in the trees. Something with both weight and size. It wasn't miniature like a squirrel or a little bit of debris falling from the trees. It had crunched the top layer of snow and the little sticks underneath. I turned my head back and slipped on the gentle slope before falling on my ass. Little shards of ice scraped my hands. I got up, turned back uphill, and quickened my pace to a jog, moving until I reached the back door. I was scared. Way too scared. I could tell from how relieved I was when my trembling hands pulled the sliding door open. That's what it all boiled down to. I was resentful about getting stuck out in the cabin because I was scared. It wasn't the principle or the inconvenience. I was afraid of sleeping back there. No way around it. I reached for the nearest lamp and turned it on, then leaned against the wall next to the door and slowly sat down against it. Surely no one had seen me, but I still felt embarrassed. I had literally just sprinted back to the house with a wet ass after hearing a cracking sound in the fucking woods, like nothing has ever stirred in the night back there before. Deer were all over the forest back there, and just last year, we'd seen a group of 4 emerge from the trees. They felt so comfortable that they came all the way up to the house. And if it were something so sinister, what kind of fiance would I have been if I had just left Brett sleeping with the cabin door unlocked? I mean, that's not proper wife material. The shapes of the living room slowly came into focus. The flat-screen TV perched above the pretend fireplace. The Christmas tree with so many sparkling ornaments it looked like it were on the verge of toppling over. And the 6 teacups that sat still on the coffee table after we'd finished watching The Grinch. I was quickly reminded of the reason I'd been forced out of bed in the first place. Oh God, I had like 30 seconds, tops. I hopped to my feet and started jogging towards the bathroom, flicking on every light switch on the way there. I finally got my sweet relief. The one delight that every person on planet Earth can relate to. My business was done in 15 seconds, if that, and I found myself humming "I Won't Be Home for Christmas" while I stood above the sink washing my hands. The sound came just as I was about to leave the bathroom. It came from inside the house. I pressed my ear against the door and listened closely. Someone walked from the living room to the kitchen, right where I had been a moment before. They must have come in through the back door, which I was sure that I'd locked. My initial reaction was to think that Brett maybe had taken the spare key to make the long walk up to the bathroom as well. Not that the notoriously heavy sleeper was one for getting up in the middle of the night. More steps sounded heavy. Whoever they were, they still had their boots on. They thudded on the living room carpet and onto the hardwood in the kitchen. It was so disruptive. Too loud for anyone who had their heads about them and knew there were 7 people sleeping upstairs. Brett wouldn't dare do anything like that. Even if he'd known my family for years, he would never be so bold to march around the house late at night, dragging snow everywhere with his boots on. Also, he wasn't that heavy. He was like 5'8" and maybe 160 pounds on a big day. Whoever was out there was a larger human being. I turned the lights off inside the bathroom to make it seem that no one was in there without any light pouring out through the cracks in the doorframe. A cold gust of air came and blew over my feet, like a little bit of the night air had gotten inside before the sliding door had been closed. The footsteps circled around inside the kitchen like someone was headed round and round the little island counter in the middle. They were clumsy and loud, still with no regard toward anyone sleeping upstairs. But nothing stirred up there. Not a single step or cranky call down the kitchen. I thought I was paranoid, freaking out over nothing more than someone going down to the kitchen maybe for a glass of water in the middle of the night. Could it have been something so minute that the rest of the family slept soundly while the scaredy-cat youngest daughter had a breakdown in the bathroom? I lingered in the darkness for what felt like an eternity. The steps finally settled and the pace slowed to just a couple every once in a while. Appliances and baskets on the kitchen counters were shuffled and the pantry door opened and closed. No matter how much time I spent waiting, I couldn't convince myself to simply walk out and see who it was. Extra security was needed. I dimmed my phone to minimum brightness and shined it into the cabinet under the sink. I carefully started moving old bottles and expired toiletries around. Eventually, I found an old corroded hammer, its head blued with age and the handle splintered. It must have been long forgotten in there after some bathroom repair, and I was incredibly grateful to have found it. I pushed the bathroom door open as gently as I could and stepped into the hall. I paused there, listening for any sound out of place. I heard only the steps from the kitchen and the occasional object being shifted. I looked to the back door, which was closed with the curtains pulled over it, just the way I'd left it. The exit was maybe 20 feet from where I stood, and although I could be in the sightline of the kitchen on the way, I could probably stroll there and be out the door before the mystery figure in the kitchen could catch me. So why didn't I do that? Why instead could I not ward off the overbearing urge to lift the hammer above my head and move slowly against the wall towards the kitchen? It was like I wanted to get a view of whoever was in there before I exposed myself. Every step was deliberate. I tried to connect with the flattest parts of the carpet and stopped right where the wall ended and the space opened to the kitchen and living room. The bar lights had been turned on, the only ones inside I hadn't flicked on myself. I couldn't hear anything move anymore. almost like whoever was in there had picked up on my presence. Slowly, I moved my face past the wall and saw that the person had their head in the fridge. Food products of all sorts had been taken out and neatly placed on the island counter behind them. They were dressed in all black, leather boots, snow pants, and a hoodie. The body type looked familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Not that it was an easy thing to do with someone hunched over and with their back to you. My next step landed on the hardwood, which groaned beneath my foot. The person's head perked up the moment the sound filled the room. I brought my hammer way over my head, like I was expecting them to rush me. I was ready to strike if needed. I'd been pushed far enough that violence was not out of the question. They hardly moved. They pulled their head gently out of the fridge and took 2 steps back without turning around. I stood there, frozen in place, my arms shaking above my head. I wanted to call out to them, but I couldn't find words that fit. I shifted my gaze slowly from the fridge to the wall oven next to it. In the blurry reflection, I saw who it was that had disturbed me so deeply. For the 3rd time that night, I was overcome with embarrassment. This time, it was so much worse than before. It was now in plain sight of a familiar face. Jerry looked sad in the reflection. Or even worse, he looked disappointed that his baby sister had snuck up behind him with a hammer, ready to strike him down. My head spun, thinking of all the different ways Jerry could break the news to the family around breakfast the next morning. So much power to humiliate me, and God knows he'd done it before. I tossed the hammer to the carpet and marched towards my boots, slipped them on without tying them up, and headed out the door. I didn't turn around until I was safely back inside the cabin with the door locked behind me. From out the window, I saw Jerry standing there at the back door. He didn't look long before pulling the curtains over. I lay down in bed and pulled the covers over my head. Of course, it had to have been Jerry who was poking around in the fridge. He was probably out with his stupid friends and was drunk and high, walloping around the house with the late-night munchies. Maybe he even thought that coming in through the back door would cancel out all the noise that he had made. I pulled more of the covers off to my side, and Brett groaned weakly in protest. I didn't care. I wrapped myself over in them until I had a giant cocoon around me. Sleep came surprisingly easy, given all the terror. I would have preferred to stay up mulling it over a little longer. That way, the morning wouldn't have come so soon. I woke up to the pale light of a winter day. I felt refreshed, like I'd slept longer than I was usually able. Normally, Dad would wake us up by knocking on the door to tell us that breakfast was ready. That was our alarm during the Christmas season. I cracked my back on either side and sat up, hands supporting me on the lopsided coil mattress. Brett still slept like a rock. He faced the far wall with his head hanging over the edge and totally void of the blankets that I'd stolen from him. I pushed his shoulder to wake him up, and he didn't move. I leaned over to whisper in his ear, and that was the moment that the whole morning became a blur of different memories that I had to piece back together in the weeks that followed. I remember seeing his face, or at least the place where it used to be. All the skin had been severed off with surgeon-like precision in an oval that rounded from his hairline to his chin. As far as I could see, no other parts of his body had been harmed. He'd bled out onto the floor, which had pooled all over the entirety of the cabin floor while we slept. I dashed out of the cabin as fast as I could, my bare feet soaked in blood, crashed in and out of the freshly fallen snow. I screamed for help over and over when back inside and was reduced to tears when no one answered. I climbed the spiral staircase slowly, gripping the banister and praying that my worst fears wouldn't be reality. All 7 people, my parents, my 2 older sisters and their husbands, and even Jerry, were all left in their beds the same way that Brett had been. Their faces were neatly removed from their heads, and their body left untouched to bleed out all over the room. All of the work completed with the same perfection. There was no sign of a struggle anywhere. My whole world crashed down around me. Everything inside me felt like it was going to explode. I had so many questions, starting with who the fuck would do something like this, and how in the hell was I still alive? I ran outside thinking that perhaps I could find a neighbor on the street or even flag down a car that was passing by. I didn't make it past the front stoop. 7 familiar faces had been left on a little mound in the snow and positioned so their unified shape could be seen from where I stood. Blood colored the snow behind them. They'd been stretched or cut where needed so that they could be laid neatly into one smiling face that looked back at me. Jerry had been pulled and bent like a banana to make the smile. Mom's brows, neat brows, and the skin around them made 2 little slits for eyes. And the rest of her and everyone else's faces were neatly placed into one big circle around them. I begged and pleaded with the police to not return to the property to retrace my steps and recount what happened, but they insisted I walk them through with my mind still fresh so I could properly recount the events. The next day, we walked around the roped-off property, retracing my steps and explaining my thoughts and decisions. We discovered that we weren't the first to follow my trail. Someone had already done it on the night of the violent crimes against my family. Narrow boot marks were left in the snow, off to the side and nearly on the path that I'd taken in and out of the house. It looked like they'd stopped in the cabin before heading back up while I was in the bathroom. The hammer I'd wielded was found outside the cabin door. A little etching was left on the wood in amazingly perfect text. Nice seeing you in the kitchen. Sorry we didn't get to chat, but hope you enjoyed my parting gift. Wear you sometime real soon. J.D.
Hey there kids, it's me, Mrcreepypasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching or listening to tonight's video or podcast. If you're interested in getting more horror stories, you can always check out the links in the description down below over to Amazon. Amazon will bring you over to a couple of different things. The Creepypasta Collections Volume 1 and 2 have some of the best authors that I've ever worked with in my entire 9 years of doing creepypastas online, as well as a link to the Creepypasta comic book and a couple of the audiobooks that I've worked on. If you like hearing my voice and want to hear more of it, you can always check over audible.com for Mrcreepypasta and find Tales from the Gas Station, Volume 1, Volume 2, and many, many others that I have worked on in the past. They're a lot of fun. I think every story I've ever worked on with these guys have always been fantastic, so it's worth your time clicking. And a very special thank you to everybody on that Patreon, patreon.com/Mrcreepypasta, especially Ariel Torres, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Chompski, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sindee Barney, Asia, G. Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen VanHuss, Tristain Pelton, Nico, TheGingerBroz, Dante Rowe, Raphael Rodriguez, Don Meulmeester, Eliminator 86, SteampunkSinner, Kaleb Dougal, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Gabrielle Undefined, Bobby Carmen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Bobby Jean Torgan, Dr. Strawberry, The Wormhole, Barbara Macedo, and Vic. Thank you guys so much, and if anyone would like to join them on that list, head over to patreon.com/Mrcreepypasta. Here's hoping that you guys are loving the horror as much as I am. And sweet dreams.